My name is Kate Butler. I'm the chair of the Canadian Coalition for the Rights of Children, and we're really thrilled to have all of you here today for this important conversation about ending violence against children. Before I introduce our host for the day, Rowena Pinto from UNICEF Canada, I just want to say that there's a real urgency to conversations about ending violence against children in Canada, what with the recent findings of remains of Indigenous children at former sites of residential schools. We dedicate our efforts at the CCRC and to ending violence against children to those working in this field and to all of those working to end violence against children, particularly those in institutional settings. We're having this conversation a few days before Canada Day, and I think that's really sort of interesting timing, and that we have to think about who we are as a country and what we want to value and what we want to honor. So I look forward to this discussion with Commissioner Dahlin and with Dr. Pepler and with Rowena. On that note, I will turn it over to the host for today. Rowena Pinto is the Chief Program Officer for UNICEF Canada. She leads efforts to promote the rights and well-being of children in Canada and around the world. For more than 20 years, Rowena has brought her strategic focus in the areas of advocacy, engagement, policy, and communications and programs to the public and charitable sectors. Over her career, she has raised the profile of organizations through strategic communication efforts and brand engagement. We're really thrilled to have Rowena here with us today, so thank you very much for moderating this conversation. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Kate, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to our second civil society webinar on ending violence against children. My name is Rowena Pinto, and as mentioned, I'm the Chief Program Officer with UNICEF Canada. The webinar has been organized by the Canadian Coalition for the Rights of Children, Canada's largest network of organizations and individuals committed to promoting the rights of children. UNICEF Canada is a proud member of the coalition. Our thanks to all members of the coalition, and in particular, former CCRC Chair, Kathy Vandergrift, for her work in bringing us all here today. Special thanks to the Public Health Agency of Canada for promoting this webinar as well. And I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that I am joining this webinar from the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the New Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. While we meet today on a virtual platform, let's take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the land where we are. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improve our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations peoples that call this nation home. Please feel free to share in the chat box an acknowledgement of the land from which you are joining us today. If you are unsure or would like to learn more, you can enter your location on the website nativeland.ca. Ending violence against children is a global priority for UNICEF and a key focus of our advocacy here in Canada. We were pleased to see Canada sign on as a pathfinding country in the Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children. We worked with our colleagues at the CCRC to coordinate civil society engagement in the process and are glad to now have the opportunity to present this webinar featuring two global experts on ending violence against children. Professor Deborah Pepler of York University is a distinguished researcher, and her research has changed the way we think about bullying, aggression, and other forms of violence, especially amongst marginalized and alienated young people. She speaks widely to professional and community audiences about children at risk. Dr. Pepler has a strong publication record and has edited 4 volumes in the past 4 years on understanding and addressing children's aggression, bullying, and victimization. Elizabeth Dahlin is the ombudsperson for children in Sweden since September 2018. Previously, she served as Secretary General of Save the Children Sweden from September 2008 to September 2018, a role she assumed from a position as ambassador in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Welcome both. A few housekeeping notes before we begin. Both Dr. Pepler and Ms. Dahlin will share presentations with us today, and then there will be an opportunity for audience questions. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat as they occur to you, and I will jot them down to ask once the presentations are finished. For any follow-up questions or to learn more about how you can get involved in the work to end violence against children in Canada, please contact Terrence Hamilton, who will share his email address in the chat. And with that, let's get started. Good morning, Dr. Pepler, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. I will just share my screen. Can everyone see that? Is that all right? Just a second. I'm going to see whether I'm at the beginning. Doesn't seem to be. So thank you so much, Rowena, and thanks to all of you who are present. And I'm especially looking forward to hearing Elizabeth talk about how things are in Sweden. I've entitled my talk Inspiring Canada again, because just over 2 years ago, we had a wonderful workshop considering the steps we could take as a country to end violence against children. And we're here 2 years later with some progress, but much work still to be done. And I'd like to engage you in thinking about that work to move forward. We've been through a very challenging time as a country, and I think our children and youth and parents have been more challenged than so many others. And Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said that this is a defining moment to reimagine the world our children deserve. And that was at the global launch of the Global Status Report on Preventing Violence Against Children last year, just about this time. And I'm going to ask you to join in reimagining and considering the kind of Canada we want for our children, the kind of Canada that they deserve. So what kind of Canada do we want for our children? Well, this is the kind of Canada we currently have for our children. And this is a UNICEF report card graph of essentially developed countries. It's a league table, OECD and other countries. And you can see in terms of promoting peace and justice and violence against children, that Canada ranks 37th out of 40 countries. So we are right at the bottom in terms of protecting our children from violence. And we have to ask ourselves, is that the kind of country that we want? What are children and youth experiences of violence when they're in safe places with safe people? Well, again, we do not fare well in terms of these experiences of exposure to violence. 28% of children experience fighting. 27% of children experience regular victimization from bullying. 25% of children have experienced violence at home before the age of 15, so 1 in 4. And Canada's child homicide rate, which was figured into the figure that we just looked at, is among the highest in the world among children and youth. We can turn the coin over and look at well-being. And this is again the league table developed by UNICEF in report card 16 that looks at children's well-being. They look at children's mental health, children's physical health, and academic and other skills. And here we rank 30 out of 38 countries and near the bottom. And it's interesting to note that we rank 31st on the countries on mental health. So these are very serious concerns that we should have as a country, that we're doing so poorly on supporting the well-being of children and youth. So the question then is, if this is not the Canada that we want for our children, what can we do? Let's look at solving this problem. Well, the United Nations, as you may know, has Sustainable Development Goals, and the Sustainable Development Goal 16 is promoting peace and justice. 16.2 is designed for children to protect them from abuse and exploitation, trafficking, and violence. And there are indicators for all of the Sustainable Development Goals, and for promoting peace and justice in 16.2, it's the proportion of children between 1 and 17 who've experienced any physical punishment or psychological aggression by their caregivers in the last month. The number of victims of human trafficking per 100,000 of the population, broken down by sex and age and the form of exploitation. And the proportion of young women and men from 18 to 29 who've experienced sexual violence before the age of 18. These are some of the indicators of how we're doing as a country on 16.2. There is a global partnership to end violence against children. It's called EVAC, End Violence Against Children, and their vision is to have a world in which every child grows up safe and secure, which is so laudable and that each of us should work towards. And the strategy for End Violence Against Children is to work together to prevent violence and respond to violence against children and youth. Canada joined as a pathfinding country in EVAC in May of 2018. So Canada signed up to be a leader in this partnership and made a formal and public commitment to comprehensive action to end all forms of violence against children. So the End Violence Against Children Partnership has an Inspire framework that guides countries to create a safe and secure environment for children and youth. And if we want to do this for Canada, these are the guidelines that we can follow and that so many other countries are following right now as they move forward in creating a safe environment. It means implementation and enforcement of laws, changing norms and values. And this is where I'm so interested in hearing Elizabeth speak, because the norms and values in Sweden have changed markedly since 1979 when they banned corporal punishment. We have to create safe environments for children and youth, give support to parents and caregivers. And I can tell you, as a mother of 3 and a grandmother of 4, I know how hard it is to be a parent. Even when you're well-resourced, it takes everything you have. And so rather than punishing parents, we need to move in and support and nurture them in their challenging job. The income and economic strengthening, response and support services for those caring for children, and education and life skills, probably both for the children and the adults. So the first, I'm going to go through a few of these Inspire strategies. And the first I wanted to talk about for Canada is the implementation and enforcement of laws. And of children who experience violence, 2 out of 3 children do that at the hands of those who are supposed to love them the most, their very own caregivers. 87% of children live in countries where corporal punishment is legal. And these data come from the endviolence.org site. 62 countries in the world have banned corporal punishment outright, and 27 countries have committed to reforming their laws. And I've seen recently that the United States is moving very quickly to ban corporal punishment. Canada, unfortunately, is not among these countries. So our children are among those who are experiencing harm at the hands of those who love them the most. So again, it calls into question, what kind of Canada do we want for our children? An article that came out only yesterday in The Lancet, co-written by Joan Durant, who's one of the leaders in this field internationally and certainly in Canada, has brought this to the forefront. They've examined 69 longitudinal studies and looked at the impact of corporal punishment on the well-being of children. And their findings and those of others are very, very clear. Corporal punishment is harmful. It's harmful to children's development, and it's harmful to their well-being. Spanking, for example, is linked to atypical brain functioning in the very same regions of the brain that are affected by more severe forms of physical and sexual abuse. So corporal punishment harms the brain. Physical punishment teaches children that aggression is an acceptable way to respond to conflict. It also teaches them that those who have the power, be it a parent or a teacher or a principal or a coach, can abuse that power to control and distress others who are less powerful. And that's exactly how we understand bullying. So children learn how to bully through corporal punishment. In the Lancet article, Joan and her colleagues found that physical punishment increases aggression over time. It increases other externalizing forms of behavior problems. It has the same harmful effects, and this surprised me. It has the same harmful effects when it's embedded in families where there are warm relationships with those youth. Often warm parent-child relationships buffer children from the impact of bullying, for example. That's not true when it comes to corporal punishment. Children who experience that in families where there's warm caregiving do not become buffered and safe from these effects. So there is no evidence whatsoever of any positive outcomes. And so much evidence, growing evidence every day that corporal punishment is harmful. And yet Canada is not one of those 27 countries on the journey to addressing this problem. In part, we aren't ready perhaps to address it because the norms and values are that parents have authority over their children. They're entitled to use punishment the way they want, to raise the children the way they want, and people don't want parents going to jail. But that's not how it's worked in other countries. In fact, in talking to Elizabeth's colleagues and others in UNICEF Sweden, we learned that when they brought in corporal punishment ban on corporal punishment in 1979, the norms and values were not supportive of that. They had the courage to bring it in anyway. And what they found is the norms and values have changed over that 30 plus period of time and 40 years. And now, according to the UNICEF Sweden, it's just completely unacceptable for adults to hit children. So in Canada, we need to cherish and honor children with a move away from this power over and punishment approach to a move to a developmental and a relationship approach to raising children. I'm going to talk a little bit about that to give you a sense of what I think we need. A developmental perspective views children as having developmental needs, as being works in progress, not as having deficits and problems. So we need to recognize that children are in the process of developing, and that's a long and slow process. Our brains aren't even fully developed until the late 20s. So this is a long period of time when humans come into the full of development. The way children learn is through trial and error. So of course they're going to make mistakes because that's how they learn. And rather than seeing those as problems, we need to see them as opportunities. This most of all, I think, occurs in learning how to relate to others. It's so much harder to learn how to do that than it is to learn how to add or how to read, which are very consistent and don't vary over time. 2 and 2 is always 4. B-O-O-K always spells book. But learning how to relate to others, even how to relate to your parents, is so complex because at different times you're meeting different people. At different times, your mother's feeling refreshed and open and can cope with chaos. And other times she has a headache and you need to interact with her very differently. This is remarkably complex. And the other thing developmental perspective takes into account is that children are continually adapting to their circumstances. And what we see as problem behavior may be a child's very effective adaptation to the world they're living in. So if they act out and draw attention to themselves, that may be fulfilling the very need that they have. So we need to think deeply about children's developmental needs and whether they're being met and how they're not being met. The challenge in all of this is that we as adults are responsible for scaffolding and creating safe and inclusive environments for children. I'll tell you a quick story about a Yupik elder who I met at a conference of Native Americans in Alaska about 10 or 15 years ago. And I asked the elder what was different between the way we raise our children in Western ways and the way that they raise their children in cultural ways, in their indigenous ways. And he shook his head and groaned and hummed and hawed, and he said, "Oh, it's so different." And then he thought again, and he said, "Do you know, the biggest difference is that we honor children's mistakes." And he went on to say, for example, when a child doesn't strap the dogs into the sled in the right way, it gives us the very best opportunity to teach that child in the moment. In Indigenous traditions, the adults are always looking for opportunities to teach. So rather than seeing this as a problem, the adults honor the children for the many mistakes they're making. And in that moment, my thinking crystallized. Everything that was floating around in my thinking about how we need to support children, especially those at the margins, fell into place. And I realized what we do is not honoring children's mistakes when we put them at the back of a class, when we exclude them from school, which is sometimes the safest environment in their lives, when we sit them on a bench for 2 hours. That is not honoring their mistakes. We do in math and reading. We give them simpler books and we break things down for them. We don't do it in social emotional learning, which is, of course, so essential to life. So let's think about safe environments. Safe environments to prevent violence really speak about safe relationship environments. It's not speaking about safe environments that don't have loose boards. Those can be fixed. It's much more challenging to fix the relationships in the home, in the school, in the community. And we can do that. I'll talk in a minute about the home. In the school, we have programs to enhance school climate, which really enhances the positive relationships in a school. We have strong bullying prevention programs with evidence of effectiveness, except in our own work, it wasn't effective with the highest risk children who were bullying others. Those children and their families need mental health support. In the community, you can identify hotspots, develop youth programs. I've learned again from research in Sweden that you can't have youth programs and youth community centers if there's not strong adult supervision. The chaos of the playground that we've observed so often takes off. And so you need, again, the adults to be responsible for the safe inclusion in that space. I just wanted to highlight one community project, which is creating safe environments for children and youth, led by the Canadian Red Cross. And Shelley Cardinal is head of this program and has developed over the last 25 years programming for Indigenous communities for violence prevention, and is working, and I have been working with her on evaluating a revised program called Walking the Prevention Pathway that really helps communities understand the cycle of violence that they've been harmed by, helps them envision a landing place for wellness, and then takes them through understanding how they can reestablish the cultural traditions that they've had that have really enabled them to thrive and to raise children in such a caring and important way. I want to talk next about parent and caregiver support. And Canada shines with opportunities for parent and caregiver support. In about 1994, and I may not have exactly the right date, in response to the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child, Public Health Agency Canada started and funded over 800 community projects through CAPC, the prenatal nutrition program, and the Aboriginal Head Start program. They funded community projects to support parents and children in the early years. I had an opportunity to work with Mothercraft in this program for 25 years in Breaking the Cycle, and Mothercraft developed, through Breaking the Cycle, an interpersonal violence prevention program called Connections. And that's been disseminated to over 30 communities across Canada through these PHAC-funded community projects. And we have good evidence of its effectiveness. But Margaret Leslie, who runs the program and I think is on today, reminded me to share with you, it's not about what's in the book or what's in the program or what's in the manual or the box. It's about how you create a comprehensive, relational, trauma-informed and developmental approach that enables change. So it's really about how you structure relationships in that program so they're caring and nurturing and are ready to hold in a safe space the potential harms that may bubble to the surface. Joan Durant, whom I've mentioned, has also developed a positive discipline approach, and the link to this is here. Again, looks at how parents can engage with their children in positive developmental ways rather than harsh and punitive ways. I just want to take 1 minute to flip to another Inspire strategy, which is education and life skills. I think if we're talking about life skills, we're really talking about relationship skills here for children and adults. And Canada leads with evidence-based education and life or relationship skills program. The Stop Now and Plan program is for aggressive children and their parents, has been going for over 35 years, is in more than 140 communities in Canada, and is also in many countries around the world. Lena Ajamari has shepherded this program, led it since its inception. The WITS program, Walk Away, Ignore, Talk It Out, and Seek Help, is developed by Bonnie Leadbeater and others in Victoria, and helps children solve problems specifically related to victimization, but helps build peer responses that are really effective in problem solving. The fourth R, developed by Claire Crooks, Peter Jaffe, and others, provides strategy for healthy youth relationships, and again is in many communities across the country, and has been supported by, as has the WITS program, by Public Health Agency Canada. So let's finish by looking at where Canada is now as a pathfinding country. Within 18 months of being a pathfinding country, the Canadian government was expected to appoint a senior government focal point to lead the country, the in-country process, convene and support a multi-stakeholder group, collect, structure, and analyze data on violence against children, develop an evidence-based and costed national action plan that sets commitments for 3 to 5 years, and a related resource mobilization plan, and consult with children and adhere to the partnership standards on child participation. What kind of Canada do we want for our children? Well, for sure, we want to shift from ranking 37th out of 40 countries on the Sustainable Development Goal 16.2. In order to do that, we have much work to do. We have to place children as a priority. A children's commissioner might help to do that, or a children's ombudsperson like Elizabeth Dahlin. We need to implement laws. The first law we need to implement is to ban corporal punishment. It's harming our children. We can't end violence without that. We need to uphold children's rights in all places, including the home. We need to shift from a power over to a developmental relational approach. There's no other way to nurture children. We need to support parents and caregivers so they can be their very best with children and youth at all times. We need very strong reconciliation efforts and support for Indigenous communities to repair and restore what we have harmed so deeply through colonization and a power over approach. And we need to promote healthy relationships to eliminate violence. And that's the name that I imagined for PrevNet, which is a national network that I co-founded and co-directed starting in 2006. So there's much to be done. I thought I'd end by just talking about an Indigenous worldview of children, where children are placed at the center. And this quote from Elaine Alec, as found in the UNICEF report on Indigenous children, really captures it. Our children are at the center of our people. They are our value that ties our people together and centers our nation. Without our children, we have no purpose. And if you reflect on that, then you can understand the impact, the huge ongoing impact of residential schools, where we took the children away and they had no value and purpose. So it's time to create a better Canada for children and youth. It will take all of us to end violence and create healthy contexts for children and youth. I thank you for being here today, for engaging in this issue, and for beginning to help others think differently about how we raise our children and what kind of Canada we want for our children. Thank you, merci, miigwech, and matna.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pepler. That was very informative. And a reminder to the audience that if you have questions for Dr. Pepler, please put them in the chat box now, and we will address as many as we can after Elizabeth speaks. I see some have come in already, so I will go back to those. Now over to Elizabeth Dahlin to share with us a bit about her work as ombudsperson for children in Sweden and Sweden's work to end violence against children in that country. Over to you.
Thank you very much. And I'm just trying to get things. Nope. Let's see if I can. Can you see the pictures?
Not yet.
Not yet.
My
No.
apologies. I'll try it once again. I'm sorry. We are. There, let me see if I can share the screen. And I am not. I don't know what happened here. Let me see if I can get it. Should be. Is it available now?
I do not see it as of yet.
You do not see it as of yet.
No.
And we did try it, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
That is the problem being a government employee, and we are having these bugs in the still can't see it, no?
No.
If you want,
Um,
Elizabeth, I can share it from my
would
screen.
you be so kind?
Yeah, no problem. And just let me know when you want to change the slide.
Just put it on, yeah, and I'll tell. Yes. So first of all, thank you very much for the kind invitation to this important seminar. I've been so impressed by Dr. Deborah Pepler's presentation, and I hope you won't be disappointed on me talking about Sweden. I am the, can you see the presentation now?
We can. Thank you.
Thanks, Terence. Thanks a million. So I am the ombudsman for children in Sweden. We are still not having the word ombudsperson. We will see now. We have had a feministic government until the end of last week, so we will see what the new government decides to do. So we are the child rights agency of the Swedish government. So since Sweden ratified the Convention of the Right of the Child, the civil society, the ombudsman, and many others have pushed very much for that to become national law, because that really means that we are taking things seriously. The first step that was taken after we had been we had signed the convention was that the Ombudsman's office was actually established in 1993. And it's based on the Paris principles of independence, but it is the cabinet of the governance, the government that actually appoints the ombudsman, but they can't fire you unless you have done something against the law. So we have almost there with the Paris principles, but not fully, because according to the Paris principles, we should be reporting to Parliament. Problem is our Parliament said we already have 3 ombudsmen, so we don't want any more to report to us. So we are, and it's all based on the Ombudsman's Act, and we are independent, and I'll come back to that. New picture, please. So we have 5 things that we should do. We should represent the rights of children and young people in Sweden. If those rights, according to the convention, are not adhered to, we have the right to intervene, propose legal changes, procedural changes, etc. We do initiate our own research and studies, and I'll come back to that also when it comes to violence against children. And we have the unique position of being the only government agency by law that should advocate and participate in the public debate. And the 5th thing that we should do is to follow the international child rights agenda and assist if our assistance is needed. The next picture, please. So there are some things that we cannot do, and that actually differs us from a number of other ombudsman's offices. We are not allowed as yet to intervene in individual cases, and we cannot supervise or we cannot fine other agencies. This is in the pipeline now. That Sweden yet has not signed the 3rd additional protocol of the CRC. Very unclear why. And we are in the process now of really pushing on us being able to push individual cases out of principled cases where child rights are not adhered to. We hope in the coming government we will get that, but as by now, we cannot intervene. We can use that as an illustration, but we may not intervene. And for us, what is problematic is that children themselves cannot as yet go to the Child Rights Committee in Geneva with their complaints, and we need to get that complaint mechanism. However, in the Swedish system, we have the authority to call other agencies or ministries, departments, municipalities, regional bodies, if we see that they are not adhering to the Convention on the Right of the Child. We don't use this very often, but when we use it in our political system, it is very humiliating for those who are being called to our office, and they will have to come to our office swiftly. New picture, please. And that's one thing that we are very happy about, and that is the CRC became national law effective of January 1st, 2020. It was a very long process for that to happen. And even when Parliament voted, we did not know how it would go, but a few people actually deviated from their party lines. So it became national law, which for us has been so important. And I would say in particular now with the ongoing pandemic, to really make sure that decisions are made out of the best interest of the child and that children's voices are being heard. However, we do also have challenges there. But for us, this was a major step actually in implementing the convention in Sweden. New picture, please. Violence against children is very, very high on our agenda in Sweden as well. And we are very happy that for the first time, it's part of the global goals. And we are strongly supporting from the Ombudsman's office, but also from the government, the End Violence. And I was lucky enough to be on the board of the End Violence for the first years, as representative of the global civil society. And I was also chairing the global board of the End Violence for half a year, when both UNICEF and WHO had new directors coming in, and I was also sharing the board when we had the first solution summit here in Stockholm in early 2018. New picture, please. I think it's important to see the effects and the global perspective. Now that was very much also the basis of goal 16.2 being realized, to see this is a major developmental challenge. It affects so many children globally. The way that the different means of violence might differ, but the severe effects on children are there. And thank you, Dr. Pepler, for really mentioning the effects on the brains of children from violence. And that is something that we have to bear in mind. Violence is not normal. It's not normal against adults, definitely not against children. And I think that is why it's so important now that it's part of the global goals. It's a joint global challenge that we have to meet. New picture, please. And I think it's also important to look into research. What are actually the consequences of corporal punishment on children? And it's not only the physical parts of the brain, it's about trust. It's about trust for adults, trust for society. But we can also see that there are other severe effects coming in, like behavior problems, like criminal behaviors. And we actually can see that there's some correlation also with lower degree of education. And I think that has also been very crucial in some of the discussions in countries passing the law on forbidding corporal punishment. I have myself been engaged in Japan over the years on corporal punishment against children. And I saw in the chat there was some discussion about if corporal punishment was a Eurocentric issue, and I'd like to differ on that. I spent a lot of my career as a diplomat in Asia, in Latin America, and in Africa, and I do not think this is Eurocentric. It's a lot about really seeing children as fully individuals when we talk about stopping corporal punishment. But I would say in the case of Japan, one of the biggest arguments for passing the law against corporal punishment, what was actually the effects on children's behavior and on children's education. So I would not say this is Eurocentric, but I think it has to do a lot with development and how we view children as a whole wherever we are in the world. New picture, please. We were the first country in the world to ban corporal punishment in 1979. Everybody laughed at us, including even our Nordic neighbors, because the issue was, how on earth can you raise a child without hitting it or disciplining it physically or verbally, but mainly physically? We had a Swedish proverb saying, the one you love, you hit. it was very much part of our Lutheran tradition also with the physical punishment. We had forbidden physical punishment corporal punishment in schools earlier, but to move to the home was very controversial. And when Parliament passed this bill, and that was very much thanks to the civil society pushing the issue with the political parties in Parliament, and also actually some of the faith-based organizations. But in all the polls to the general population, the majority of the population was dead against the ban on corporal punishment. The discussions were very much among the public. Well, are all the parents going to go to jail? What happens in my home is my own thing. I raise my family the way I want to do. And these things actually have changed thanks to the law. But it was very, very strong resistance from the public. So it was not an easy decision to make, but it was made. And we can see today there are 76 other countries that passed law almost like this law. New picture, please. So the legal prohibition came in 1979. But it took a few years until corporal punishment was actually incorporated under public prosecution in the same way as violence against women are incorporated under public prosecution. That means that if a case has been brought to the police, and sometimes the person who reported, or the wife, or the person in the family who reported, comes back and say this was not actually the case, and they don't want this investigation to go on, it goes on because it's under public prosecution. And that was a big step. And I think the biggest step was actually to bring child rearing from something inside your own home into something that was important to the whole society. Now you can see the picture with the milk packages. I don't know, it's in Canada, but in Sweden, grown-ups and kids drink milk. We drink a lot of milk. We are like calves. We drink milk in the morning, we drink milk with lunch, we drink milk with dinner. And the biggest educational part, apart from other efforts for parents and in schools, etc., was actually the education on the milk packs for 3 years, showing ways of raising children without violence. How can I deal with a child that doesn't listen to me? What can I do as a parent? What is good for kids? A lot of questions to children as well. And that kept on for 3 years. And I would say the civil society was amazing in training, in discussing positive parenting without violence. And it took 2 years. So in 1981, the majority of the population, they knew about the law. Everybody might not have agreed with it, but they knew about it. And that actually changed a lot of behaviors. New picture, please. So the vision was never to put parents in prison. And I think this is very much on which perspective we look upon. Is it the parent's perspective or the child's perspective of the best childhood possible? But to look at children as independent individuals with whom we respect their integrity. That was the aim of the law. And the right of having an upbringing without violence. And the whole idea, and that was very clearly spelled out from our parliament, it was to change attitudes and not to criminalize parents. Of course, we still have cases in Sweden with severe violence against children. It's a criminal act, but the thing was not to criminalize parents. But we needed to have a very large information campaign. And I think you can actually draw a parallel with using seatbelts in the car. People were dead against seatbelts in the car when it came in Sweden. Well, I do whatever I do in my car and I don't feel comfortable with seatbelt, etc. Now, if there is a law and you might have to pay a fine every time you don't use it, it takes a few months. People actually use the seatbelts. Same thing with smoking in restaurants, for instance, or public places. A law can change behaviors, not automatically, but with a lot of support on the why. Because if people know the why, they can change their own how. New picture, please. Change does not happen by itself. Just passing a law won't do the job. So a lot of the efforts were also to engage with children themselves, that they should know about it. So preschools and schools, teaching about violence, talking about violence. It's a lot about parental training. We used to have, we don't yet anymore have that very comprehensive parental training, but as you might know, in Sweden, all antenatal is free of charge, as are children's medical services until they are 19 and dental services until they are 21. So all parents have the access of parental training in the antenatal clinics. And that was one of the grounding things. When you're getting your baby, you're getting your child, you really want the best for your child. But one thing that we have seen is to get the medical service to dare to ask pregnant women about violence in the home, to ask parents when they come with the children about violence, and that medical staff actually look upon children when they come to a clinic. You might come in for another disease, but if you see bruises or with x-ray broken bones, it's important to actually dare to ask. Media has played an enormous role in actually educating people about it, but also to bring up cases to keep on discussing violence against children. Another big step was the curriculum for professionals, health professionals, for teachers, preschool teachers, counselors, that they actually would know about violence. How do you see signs of violence? What are the preventive measures? How can I reach a family that don't want to discuss it, etc., etc. Civil society played and still plays an enormous role in actually bringing up the issue on violence against children and new forms of violence against children. And faith-based organizations has really moved the needle. And when I say faith-based organizations, I would like to talk about that in a very broad spectrum. So that because people listen to the community leaders, to the faith-based leaders, and actually to have the faith-based organizations involved has meant a lot, and as it does also in the End Violence initiative. For instance, in Brazil, the big resistance against the law came from the Pentecostal groups, which are fairly widely represented in the Congress and Senate in Brasilia. There we actually were in contact with the Pentecostal church in Sweden that kept for advice. How can we reach these parliamentarians? And that was very much to really, and they looked upon, as we did in Sweden, on violence against children as something that belonged with inside the family. So the whole discussion had to be more, what is a happy family? How do you have a happy family? Is a happy family where you beat your wife, where you beat your children? Or do you want to have a positive dynamic? And I would say that the faith-based organizations did a very, very important job in Brazil in moving the needle on the view on children and violence against children. New picture, please. So where have we come now? What have the achievements been? Well, there were legal change, but that had to be backed up with other laws, including gender equality, because violence against children is often very much connected to violence against women. But the normative change has been maybe one of the biggest achievements. It would be hard to be at a dinner party in Sweden and anybody actually talks about disciplining the children with violence, even the light violence. It doesn't happen. Children themselves they know very clearly if a child in the preschool or in school hears that another child is being beaten, that is something they will react very strongly. We've had a number of very much publicized cases here where children of foreign diplomats who have been beaten, actually the social services intervened, uh, because other children in school said that this is no longer right, and even the foreign children themselves reacted. So I think that normative change is enormous, and it has changed the dynamics in how we talk and interact with children. Because without violence, you will have to explain a lot to your children. And I think the dynamics in the family have changed. We do have our challenges, but the normative change is there. We had a very famous, well, yeah, it was a famous case a few years ago where tourists from Italy, family was discussing what they were going to have for lunch. And the child wanted to get one thing, an 11-year-old, and the father wanted something else. And this was in the midst of Stockholm. And in the end, the father pulled the child by the nape of the neck and shook him by the ears and screamed at him. And within 10 minutes, the police was there. And the person who actually had reported was a refugee from Iraq who had been in Sweden for 3 years. But part of the training had also been in Swedish, had been about nonviolence. And that was the mayor from a city in Italy. So there was a lot in the media about it. But I think it was so important that the normative change can take place, and it does take place. We can see increased reporting on violence against children. We still think there are a lot of cases that are not being reported. We have had some very sad cases where children actually have died of violence in their home or in the foster home or in relatives' homes. By Swedish law, any one of us who work professionally with children, it could be a teacher or us in the ombudsman's office or healthcare staff. By law, if we suspect a child is a victim of violence, we have by law to report. We can lose our jobs if we don't report. The public is encouraged to report, and they can report anonymously. Then it's up to the social services to investigate. Sometimes there was no reason to worry. In many cases, there has been a reason to worry. What worries us is whenever there have been very tragic events, a lot of people around, neighbors, relatives, kids, parents of other kids said, oh, we knew something was strange, or we could see that this child did not have the protection that they should have, etc., etc. But people have been hesitant to report, which is sad. So we really, from the ombudsman, we were really encouraging people to report. And we think also that, and that is also, as Dr. Pepler talked about, the importance of research on the effects of violence. And we see that there is a lot of research, but we still think we need to get even more research to really convince those who are not yet convinced about the effects of violence against children. And finally, people are discussing child rearing. How do we bring up our children? It's not something that is only inside the family. It's something that could be discussed by everyone. And the picture I chose here is also when I started earlier about the gender equality laws. One of the law we have is, of course, of the parental leave, both for women and men. And the guy in the picture was a very well-known weightlifter in Sweden who was a very, very strong man participating in the Olympics, etc., but who was home with his child, because we need to get this role models. We need to see the house. New picture, please. A big step is the parental support, and to prevention is the whole idea. And if we look in the CRC, we find in Article 18 that there are structured methods for parental training. This could be done in groups or individually. But we think that it's very important to have the general program, so we reach all the parents. And then there might also need to be extra support for parents with specific needs. But we think also to really reach out, it's important to have these general programs of parental training. And that's also why we got some of the new legal changes. And there are at the moment 29 different programs of parental training, of which 11 are digital. And now with the ongoing pandemic, a number of these programs, the other programs, have gone digital as well. And if parents feel the need, or the society feels that the parents need to get enhanced training, the social services and the medical services, as well as civil society, can offer that, and that can be done also without referral and without costs. New picture, please. I just wanted to share this picture with you because it really shows how attitudes on corporal punishment have changed over the years. If you look from the 60s, where corporal punishment was kind of, that is what was being used, until the law came in 1979, and then how the attitudes have changed. So this does not mean that we don't have cases of violence against children. It does not mean that all children are protected from violence, but we can see that the attitudes and the behaviors have changed. New picture, please. So we still do see a lot of challenges. That is also why I am very happy that Sweden was the first country to raise the hand to be a pathfinding country. We see new challenges, and we see some of the old challenges are still there. And we can see there are new forms of violence. I could see in the chat there was some discussion on the gang violence. Violence between fairly young children has increased in the last couple of years. We are also seeing what in Sweden is called honorary based violence, against both girls and boys because of traditional values, where actually children can lose the lives, or where children are forced into marriage. We also see that each generation needs to be involved. We have the law, yes, we have the education, but we need to keep the fire burning. We need to raise these issues and the awareness for each generation. We also see that there is a need to detect violence. It is for the medical services, but it is also for schools, etc., and to know and to dare to ask. That is so important. What we see is also that children are the victims of violence, and violence between children. How can we meet that? How can we prevent, and how can we act when that happens? One big issue that we see is in our legal system, the parental rights are so much stronger than children's rights in the legal system. As I said in the beginning, when we look now on the cases actually brought to court, we still find instances of educational discipline in the forms of violence. We went through all the cases in primary court on violence against children as a way of raising children. And we had 48 kids from the north to the south of the country. And we went through each court case and saw how did the court deal with it. The perpetrators were either the mother, the father, alone or together. In one case, a grandmother, and in one case, a stepfather. But we wanted to see how did the courts deal with it. And we could then see that when it came to children being hurt, we could see that it had been documented. But the best interest of the child had not been the case in any of the issues. In most of the cases, I would say almost all of except one, there was a punishment from the court. But the parental rights are still so strong. So children, for instance, in custody conflicts, do not automatically have the right to be heard because one or both parents can stop that from happening. Children in custody cases do not have their own legal representative. So we can see that we have a lot of failures where the parental rights are so much stronger. So we do see the need for legal changes. The good thing is that we have a new law with children who are witnesses of violence. If a child has witnessed violence in the home, the children is considered a victim as well. That is a giant step forward. However, for the child who was in school when one of the parents was beaten or comes home to a house that is in havoc, they are not seen as victims. But that was a major step, at least to the fact that children should not have to witness violence in their home. Save the Children went through all the cases, that's about 8 or 10 years ago, all the cases what they call domestic violence, and we all know what domestic violence means. Went through all the domestic violence cases and the police reports, and we could see when it came to children that in 1/3 of the cases, it was not even registered if children had been present. In 1/3 of the cases, it was recorded that children were present, but they had been in another room or another floor. And we all know that children, of course, don't see or hear anything when there is violence in the home. And in 1/3 of the cases, actually the social services had been contacted to take care of the children. In 100% of the cases, though, we could see that dogs, cats, and canary birds had been taken care of. And I think that really showed how children as victims of violence actually had been seen. And the last thing I really would like to mention is the best interest of the child. We can see we have the law with the CRC being national law. We can see that we have the law against corporal punishment. We've had it for 42 years. We're very proud of it, but we still see many challenges. But we can see in many decisions concerning children, both with violence and their or other rights being violated, the best interest of the child has not been part of the decision making, has not been documented, and has not been communicated. So we do find a lot of challenges. I'd be happy to answer any kind of question. Last picture, please. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, and thank you so much for sharing your experience with all of us. It is now time for questions, and I know I've already seen there are some questions in the chat, but perhaps just to get the discussion started, I'll start with a couple of questions to each of you. So first, a question for Deborah. So much of your research has focused on the interpersonal relationships and behavior behind violence against children. And we know that government can't just legislate people into being better friends or parents or peers. So with that being said, what is your opinion on some of the most effective policy changes that could address some of these underlying dynamics?
That's such a good question. And I think I'm going to come at it with some recent data that I just read, which is that the median age for the onset of lifespan mental health problems is 14.5 years. So half of the people who are ever going to have lifespan or mental health problems through their lifespan have them by the time they're 14. There's other research by Rolf Lober and David Farrington that looked at children who are involved with the law, child delinquents, and the average age that they become delinquent is 14.5 years. Not probably circumstantial that those two things align. What they found, though, was the problems that the children had were evident 7 years before that. So as Leonage Mary talks about, there were 7 years of warning, 7 years to show that these children weren't adapting, weren't developing the relationship capacity that they so much need in order to move into a healthy and contributing and happy adulthood. So I think we need to have a much deeper focus on mental health problems, but that focus can't wait until people are in their late 20s or 30s and experiencing depression or antisocial personality. We need to support children and their families and their schools in ensuring that they're nurtured, that they feel safe, that their brains aren't hyper aroused as happens with physical punishment, and ensure that they're learning the social emotional skills that they need for success in intimate relationships, in raising children, in being a successful person in the workplace. I think there are ways of starting with children that really build a different society.
Great, thank you. So now a question for Elizabeth. So I understand that as part of the global partnership, Sweden is currently developing a national strategy to end violence against children. So can you tell us a bit about the process, who was involved, and what the timelines are?
Well, the strategy is actually being done at the moment, so that and we look very much forward to it. But I mean, that will be involved with many consultations with civil society. We are having a meeting with that committee now in August, and I think it's very timely to really see, you know, what needs to be done here and now, because the different forms of the challenges with violence have changed over the years. And we at the moment in our office are actually doing a state-of-the-art report on the situation of violence in children in Sweden up to now. That is not the one that is forward-looking. And just to give an example how important it is to talk about violence is we had in-depth interviews with children in 7 or 8 different schools. And there was a twin boys, 9 or 10 years old, and they actually been asked, you know, well, how can violence look like, and it came up to sexual violence, and one of the results was actually one of the brothers had been sexually abused by a neighbor's son. He didn't know it was wrong. And these are children who are coming from middle class families, living in this case, who you would thought who had learned about it in preschool, learned about it in school, and it was only when the questions were asked. So I think it's so important that we, as part of the End Violence, really develop a strong strategy, because we can see that there are loopholes in the child protection network. We might have one of the best child protection systems in the world, I would say, but we still see that there are big loopholes when children from a simple interview actually suddenly report.
Oh, thank you for that answer. So one of the questions that I've seen in the chat, and it's kind of a two-parter, I would say, I'm making it a two-parter. So one person is asking about, they would like to know your thoughts on how communities and countries how do you address communities or countries that see this approach as a Eurocentric way of parenting? And I guess related to that is, I know you talked a bit, Elizabeth, about not criminalizing parents, but we know that there are certain communities in Canada that are over-policed already and have an over-representation in the child welfare system, etc. So how do we ensure that these communities who might have a different view of corporal punishment aren't again over-policed? All related.
Very good question. But I think on the Eurocentric issue, I mean, it's basically exactly the same attitudes that we had here in Sweden. I said this is violence against children is a global problem, and at the same time, I would say all parents want the best for the children, and I think it's many times we do as our parents did. And if parents can be empowered and see that there are better ways of raising their children. I think most parents want to listen. But we had, as I said earlier, I was very much involved in Japan, and I've been there on a number of occasions, and it was very much this culture is part of our culture, etc. And it's interesting to see how that could change within 6-7 years in Japan when we started to talk about the child, not the parent's perspective, but what is good for the child. And I think that is how we can reach out. I think a law is it's a first step, but people need to know the house. How can I do instead of beating my child or slapping the hand, etc. And I think that is also, as also saw in the chat, some people said, what is violence? Well, if you look on the UN study on violence against children, it could be verbal, it could be psychological, and even a small slap can be very humiliating for the child. And the parents might be, sometimes we hear that from parents, well, I was tired from work, or I was irritated, and then you beat your child. The child doesn't learn from that. And another argument we heard a lot in Sweden, and I actually had a terrible debate in Strasbourg at the Council of Europe, but one of the parliamentarians said, oh, I was beaten as a child and it didn't hurt me. And I said, how do you know? Because you didn't see the alternative. But I think the good thing is to build on the fact that parents do want the best for their children. And on the how can a positive parenting be dealt with? Now, there are communities that might be stigmatized. And I can understand if it's felt that it's over policed. And I think it shouldn't be criminalizing parents. But as we do here with parental training, there might be groups in society who needs additional training. But I think I don't think the solution is to bring children from the families, unless the children need to be protected. But I think look at it in a wholesome way. Healthcare professionals, faith-based organizations, really reaching out to the parents and discussing, what is best for your child. I had a question a few weeks ago from a journalist who said, oh, I just talked to a mother. She was so humiliated because the social services contacted her and she feels stigmatized. And I said, yes, I'm sure she did. But this was for her child. And I think we need to put the focus on what is good for the child or the children rather than for the parents, but then help the parents. And I'm very happy, Deborah, that you mentioned, positive parenting. I mean, people can change and attitudes can change.
Great, thank you. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Can I just jump in?
Of course.
Because we learned so much. I've learned so much through Breaking the Cycle, which is a program for substance using women and their young children, and these are women at the margins who are involved, with the law. But by building connections to children's services, by building relationships that surround and support the women rather than blaming and shaming the women, they can slowly come to begin to understand what healthy relationships look like, because truly they don't know. Truly they don't know. And in the Connections program that was disseminated in 30 communities, we did focus groups, and the women said it was so important to understand that the violence they were experiencing wasn't normal. They'd seen their mothers experience that violence, and they were experiencing it. And I think one of the turning points in engaging women in the process was to help them not only think about the impact that violence had on them as children, but also the impact that it has witnessing violence on their own children or experiencing violence on their own children, and then helping them think through what they can do differently. So it's a very supportive, nurturing context that recognizes and accepts where women are at, and then helps to move them to truthfully where they want to be. I've not met one woman at Breaking the Cycle who didn't want to be the very best mother she could be.
Great, thank you. Okay, I have just seen another one. Okay, so in terms of violence against Indigenous children in particular. So eliminating corporal punishment is one of the calls to action of the Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission here in Canada on Indian residential schools. So thoughts from both on addressing communities whose children have historically experienced violence at the hands of the state.
Well, if you don't mind, Elizabeth, I'll just start and then you can
Please, yes.
join in. You know, it's been an incredible opportunity for me to be in partnership, walking alongside Indigenous communities for the last 20 years. And Shelley and I have just written a paper about how communities have told us, have shared with us, how they can move from the terrible violence of colonization that they've experienced. So much more than we can imagine. And we've developed a timeline that will be available in the next few months to help Canadians understand the weight and burden of violence that Indigenous communities have experienced. And to give you a sense of that, just to give you a sense, there are 180 squares on this historical timeline, 18 time periods and 15 layers of harm. The sort of implementation of residential schools represents about 10 of those squares, those 180 squares. So we can't even begin to imagine the challenges that these communities have faced. But again, in working with communities, all communities want to do well for their children. And by understanding where they've started, which is part of the difficulty that they have, they can't articulate the exact harms that they're experiencing. By understanding where they're starting and thinking about where they want to go, they can begin to think about how to reclaim the ways of raising children that they have used for 10,000 years on this land. And the Inuit are a really good example. They have a very structured way of raising children so that they have the capacity to survive on such a harsh land. So they know how to do it. It's just a question of ensuring that they can move from this burden of violence that they struggle with to where they definitely want to be.
Thank you. Elizabeth, did you have anything to add on that one?
Yeah, I think, I mean, we do two short examples. We have the Sami or the Lapps population in Sweden. Actually, I'm a quarter from in the very north of Sweden, and where we had a tradition just like you've had in Canada, with residential schools, or actually children being picked up when they were 2, 3, 4 years old to be brought in to speak mainstream Swedish, or I mean, where it's a part of the history I think very few Swedes are very proud of. But we can still see the challenges if they are not there, and the outside framing is no longer there like that. But we are very worried for the situation of young people growing up in the Sami population of exclusion. There's a very high rate of suicide among young male Lapps, and this has been going on for many years in history. And so I think, and that is why it's so important to reach out and again start with the child, start with what is good for the child, support the parents, and we don't criminalize, but try to work through the Indigenous organizations with full respect. I think that is so important. The other example I want to give, and as I've been spending some time in Kosovo, where they have a big Romani population that are very much excluded and victims of violence, where the children are not going to school. The same thing in Romania. And basically these children are so discriminated when they're supposed to start school, because these are kids who are not used to routines, children who are raised traditionally in the community, not by the families, and where actually civil society is doing an amazing job in reaching out to the local communities to have preschool for the schools for the children, so that the children actually can be included, not losing their heritage, but when you have illiterate parents, discuss with the parents. And I met some of those, both mothers and fathers, both in Kosovo and Romania, where parents are almost crying and say, please let my children get an education. Let them be part of society. And again, so we have to start with this child and have the child protection system around it to support the parents. And I think that's the way we have to do it.
Thank you both. Yes, complicated questions for you this morning.
Yes.
We have time for one more. There's a lot of great information in the chat. If so, people, I do ask participants to take a look yourselves. But I guess one of the things is we're seeing a lot of best practices come from other countries and other areas. So how can we do a better job in sharing best practices towards ending violence against children, both within Canada as well as internationally? And if any of you have any thoughts on that.
I can just start. I don't believe in blueprints because, I mean, each situation looks different in each country, but I think we all can learn from each other. I think the End Violence is fantastic as a platform, and to disseminate that information. And I think also this, to reach out and ask what works in one country might work in another or not, but to really see the good examples and the way that the needle can be moved. And I think that could be very much encouraging. And I think, I mean, good examples like Uruguay that passed a law. I think how could they work in that community? Really looking on different parts of the world to pick out the good pieces, because there's so much good work being done. But also to start talking about it, the right of the child for a non-violent upbringing, rather than parents who can feel humiliated. I mean, we have to change our perspectives.
Deborah, we have 1 minute. Do we have anything to add?
Yes, I would just like to add that I think, and Elizabeth talked about this, we need to put the best interests of the child as a priority in our country. And as we've seen through the pandemic, it hasn't been. Children have been out of school, at least in Ontario, for 5 months. We have to make children a priority. But I think we have so many strengths. There are so many programs across Canada that have evidence of their effectiveness. I think we have to come together. We're a vast country, but I think we need to come together and have many discussions led by the federal government to break down the provincial and territorial barriers and just start to say, this is the health of our children. Nothing is more important for the future of the country. Let's sit down and make this happen. And I think the End Violence Against Children partnership is a wonderful place to start.
Thank you both. So unfortunately, we've run out of time. And so my sincere thanks again to both of you for just having wonderful presentations and wonderful interactions. I hope our audience is feeling energized to get back to work on ending violence against children here in Canada and around the world. If you want to learn more about the CCRC's work on ending violence and to stay informed about events like these, please visit their website at rightsofchildren.ca and sign up for the newsletter. That is it for now, and thank you all and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.